Okay, good afternoon. My name's Keith Cameron, and Enid's been bugging me for 6 months or so to give a little chat. Our family's a little unique, and I'm going to start with my father in the dirty 30s when him and his brother and a couple other farm boys rode the rails out in, I think it was 35, and they ended up on southern Vancouver Island working in the logging industry. And they started at Souk, and believe it or not, they logged in Brentwood and Deep Cove area, North Saanich, and Mill Bay, I guess where the logs were closer to the water and they could drop them in because there was no logging roads or logging trucks or anything. And anyhow, in that time, he met my mother, her family's an old Victorian family, and she was teaching out in Brentwood and living at her mother's place in Victoria. And one thing led to another, and they got married in 1939. And then I came along in 1940, but prior to me being born, my father and his brother joined the Air Force, and because the war was going then, and they were both ended up as navigators on Lancaster bombers. My uncle was shot down in the North Sea out of Scotland, I think it was. They never did find him. My dad's aircraft was shot down and he got hurt pretty bad. So they sent him back to Canada to instruct navigation on, I guess, Lancaster and what other bombers they had. So consequently, me and my mother lived with my grandmother in Victoria. And I remember my dad was home twice during the war, and it seemed shortly after he left that damn Stork would bring me a baby brother. And he never did bring me a baby sister. So anyhow, when the war was over, we got out, and I don't know how it happened, but we owned the old Elk Lake Auto Court for 1 year. I don't know if anyone remembers the Elk Lake Auto Court. Yeah. I used to pump the gas up in the thing there, and I think Cunningham's, wasn't their garage across the street from us? Yeah, and the Toby Jug and all that stuff. And I'll never forget when we were living at the Elk Lake Auto Court, there was a bunch of Canadian Army war prisoners came back from, I guess, Japanese prisoner of war camps. And I remember the poor guys sitting down on the docks at Elk Lake, and the folks that were with them told us not to go near them. That'd be Gary Cunningham and me and whoever else, because these fellows were in such bad shape. Anyhow, I guess he sold the auto court after a year. He figured it wasn't for him. And my grandmother had a cabin at Prospect Lake. So we moved there, and in the meantime, my father had bought 4 acres off of Mr. Lorett's nursery at Wilkinson and Miller Avenue. And he bought, I think it was an army hut, and had it moved there. And then him and another guy stripped it and put in the bedrooms and all that stuff. And for the year he was doing that, I went to Prospect Lake School, grade 1. And then I guess he finished the house, and we moved to Wilkinson Road, and I started at Royal Oak, the old school, in grade 2, and I went there till grade 6. There's a few people here that I went to school with, but I won't mention names because of age. And then we all moved over to the beautiful brand new Royal Oak High School in grade 7. We moved across the street. And it was just a gorgeous school. In the meantime, my father sold 2 acres of his property to Ian Fowler's parents, Jock and I forget his mother's name. And Mr. Fowler built the greenhouses on there and raised his tomatoes. And this was right at Miller and Wilkinson Road. Some of our neighbors were the Williamses, Pete, and I don't know if you know them, Naomi, Eldridge. And then the Scott girls lived right beside us. And then just down the hill about a block away was this cute little redhead that used to be shooting around. Again, I won't mention any names, but I think she worked at Lorette's Telephone Exchange. Didn't you, Enid? I know the Scott girls did. Did you babysit for us? Okay, the Scott girls babysat for us, yes. Yeah. So everything was going great then, and we had a wonderful life there. I was in Cubs, just down the hill across from McDonald's old house. Bob Slater, the fireman, he was our Cub leader. And then we went to Scouts, and Mr. Goddard, Peter's dad, was our Scout leader. I played hockey in Victoria. We square danced at Royal Oak. I forget what nights a week it was. Fished in Colquitt's Creek, again could catch fish. And then come along in '54, my dad inherited his grain farm in southwestern Manitoba. And it was a 1.5 sections, strictly grain, no cattle. And it was 3 miles long and 1/2 mile wide. So I went from the beautiful Royal Oak area to the old Bald Prairie. We had to walk a mile to school, and it was a one-room school, grade 1 to grade 10, one teacher. And I think at one time there was 19 students, and then it went downhill. They had a livery barn there, and people actually rode their horses to school and back. Now, what a cultural shock for me after leaving here. So I was out of the picture here, and then I came back in 1960. I just had enough out there and came back to Victoria. And got married here, and I got involved in the transportation industry, mainly trucking. And when I was 21, which would be 1961, we had a contract with the DEW lines. I remember, if you remember those radar stations all across, and we would haul the military people out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California by Santa Barbara to all the radar bases. The people could take their personal effects. And this was the start of the racial problems in the States, and it was you know, here's this 21-year-old farm guy down there and seeing these riots, and it was just terrible. Anyhow, I quit driving truck and I got into working in different offices and that, and got married. And when I was married, we moved worse than the military about every 2 years. I've lived in Victoria, Duncan, Campbell River, Port Hardy, Prince George, Richmond, Calgary, and then back to Victoria. And ironically enough, when I got back here, I lived in Sydney. My kids went to school in Sydney. And then in 1989, we bought a house, brand new house at Loretz Ballpark, 2 blocks from where I started out with. So I've done the whole circle. We still live up there. When I was living here, I remember when I was 10 years old, my first job, myself and Lou Burden got a job with Mr. Loretz. And he had about a 10-acre field, and it was all full of roses. And this was in, I guess, July or August. And our job was to cut the heads off the roses so the workers could come along and they'd graft them and crossbreed the roses somehow. So we'd be out there in the hot sun all day, and Mr. Loretz kept his eye on us, and you couldn't sit down, you had to bend over and cut these heads off these darn roses and that. Anyhow, since we've been back in the area, I've got involved with you guys. My wife's getting very involved with the church next door, and there's some of these gals here that we see golfing once a week, and it's very nice to be back. And basically that's me in a nutshell. I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything. Yes?
Could you give us, please, the name of your mother, the name of your grandmother where you lived, and the name of your wife?
Oh, yeah. My grandmother was Jenny Morey, M-O-R-R-Y, and they were Newfies, and they came around the Horn to Victoria. And there were a whole bunch of these people. They were all good Catholics. And my grandfather and his brother were contractors. And they built the north wing of the Empress and the breakwater. Another part of the family is the Griffiths from Griffiths Plumbing and Heating. Another part is Mike O'Connor, the lawyer. I don't know if you know him. My grandmother's name was Catherine, and when she was teaching, now this is in the 30s, the only job she could get was out at Brentwood, and she used to drive from her mother's place. They lived on Stanley Avenue at the Oak Bay Junction there, and I remember her telling me that they used to pick up the Chew kids. She would. They'd be going, I guess, to Prospect Lake School. I don't know where they'd be going to school, but they'd be walking up the road, Johnny and them, and she'd give them a ride if she saw them and that. And then my mother, Catherine, her mother had this cottage at Prospect Lake, and like I said, that's where we lived, and they owned it. Her brothers sold it, I don't know when it was, probably the mid-60s to late 60s, that they sold the place at Prospect Lake. And my uncle, he bought a lodge right next to Yellow Point up at Nanaimo called Mermaid Cove. So. But I must say, we had such a good life here in those days. We used to supper with the McDonald's back and forth. With our parents were friends, and you know, you could ride your bikes up to go swimming at the lakes, and the fishing and the whole social life, and then to go back to this town of 250 people where you had to walk a mile to school and a mile back.
What was the name of the town?
Waskada, Waskada.
Yeah.
It was 5 miles from the North Dakota border and 30 miles from the Saskatchewan border. All gravel roads in those days. We had the telephone system. One ring was yours, and a long and a short would be ours, and everyone would listen. It was a very culture shock for me. So.
What did he farm, Keith?
Pardon me?
What did your dad, what was the farm?
Oh, it was strictly grain, and we grew fall rye, wheat, barley for malting. They called it malting barley, and they sold that to the breweries. And then flax, we grew flax seed, and
Did he know what he was getting himself into?
oh yeah, he was raised there, and he inherited it when his dad died. Yeah.
Did he stay there?
Pardon me?
Did he stay there, your dad?
Yeah, they retired there.
No, they didn't.
At the end, they used to spend, when I was living in Sydney, Mom and Dad would come out and spend the winter there in that motel by the ocean there. I forget the name of it now. But yeah, and then they both passed away. Yeah.
How long did you live in Saskatchewan?
Me?
Yeah.
See, about 12 years.
That was enough winter, eh?
Wind. And being a grain farmer, there was nothing to do in the winter because we didn't have cattle, we didn't have pigs or none of that stuff. So did a little curling. Yes.
Was your wife a local girl? Because you said you got married.
Which wife?
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up how many.
Well, my first wife was from Duncan, and my second wife is from Aldergrove.
Oh.
And she was raised on a dairy farm in Aldergrove, yeah. So, yes, ma'am, were you going to ask me something?
I've forgotten your brother's names, Keith, but could you give us an update on your family?
Well, the guy 18 months younger than me, that was the first leave. He lives in Edmonton now.
What's his name? I've forgotten.
David.
David.
And he went to University of Manitoba and was a civil engineer. And he spent half his life with Labatt's Brewery, building breweries and bottling plants around the world. And then he went with McCain Foods and built plants and troubleshot for them in all their places around the world. And him and his wife live in Edmonton. Why, I don't know. And then Graham, he was the second leave. He lives in White Rock. And he was a very successful businessman. And I keep on the good side of him because he has a very nice condo in Maui. And then after we got back here, it would be in 1950, I had another brother, and he did his career in the RCMP, and he's now retired in Kamloops.
What was his name? What's his name?
Except the baby brother didn't, no, but the other guys, grade 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, yeah.
What's the youngest one's name?
Pardon me?
What's the youngest one's name?
Bruce. He's 67 now. So, yeah, so we did a lot of traveling around, but we kept coming back to the Royal Oak area. And
On Wilkinson Road, where was your place? On the Miller side or the other side?
the other side,
And it's still kind of wide open there.
yeah, it is. The old army hut's still there. I don't know who owns it. All of the Fowler's greenhouses are all gone. And Williams, where their farm was, I think it's, what do they call it, subsidized housing or something in there at the end of Miller Avenue. Yeah,
Townhouses or
yeah.
whatever.
And then, well, what's that road across from your farm, Enid? Lindsay? Yeah, there used to be, right down by the shopping mall, there used to be a hazelnut farm there. Do you remember that? They grew hazelnuts, and the guy that owned it, I don't know who he was, but I know he'd let Lou Burden and I go in there after they'd picked the crop, and we'd fill up bags like this and take them home with hazelnuts off the ground. It's quite interesting. And then we lived very close to the mental institution, and it was pretty, I don't know how to say it. The patients there were really bad people. And we'd go up behind the Cuthberts and that in the fields where they'd be working and talk to the guards. Guards would be standing there with shotguns, and these killers and everything else running around working in their fields never bothered us. We had no qualms going out at night, did we, in the dark? And they used to blow a whistle. Was that at 6 o'clock? They blew the whistle. Do you remember that?
Remember the sirens going off every once in a
Yeah,
while?
when they had an escape. But they had a steam whistle, and I know that was our notice to get home because supper was ready. Yeah, and you could hear it all through the valley there. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Would you mind expanding a little bit on your trucking and your business out of the United States and up to the Dew Line? How did that work?
Yeah, that was, okay, now first of all, you got to realize you had to be 21 to drive truck in the States. And the company I work for, United Van Lines, they signed a contract that I wouldn't go west or east of the Mississippi, and I'd stay in the 4 western provinces in the Yukon. And so here's this 21-year-old kid off the prairies. And I remember going down, I was in Monterey, California, and there was a big U.S. Marine base there. And it was at night, and there was such a fight going on with these military guys, blacks and whites, that the police just shut the road down, and you couldn't go anywhere, just let them fight till they dropped, I guess. Another time I was going through Portland, this is before I-5, again in the evening, and there was this young black couple standing on the corner, and she was crying her heart out, and there was these white guys in a car just screaming at them, just like banshees. So I opened my door, get in. So, and I drove the kids a couple of blocks away or something, let them out. Yeah. Another time I was in a restaurant, and there was another truck parked out front like mine. He was the driver, but he was out of, I think, New Orleans, but he was black. I sat with him, you always do with people, and I wasn't getting served. And finally he says to me, boy, if you all want to get something to eat, you got to go sit over there. I didn't know any of this stuff coming from a little hick farm town. Yeah. Anything else?
Could you tell us what you and Lou Burton got up to when you're fishing?
No. I'll tell you one story. Do you folks know where the Cuthbert farm was? On the hill? Well, my youngest brother, I'd be 10 then, Lou would be 12, and he was born in August, and this was when snow had fallen. And we had him out on a sleigh with a cardboard box sitting on it, and he's in his little snowsuit. And we were sliding up and down the hill from Mr. and Mrs. Burden's down to Lindsay Avenue and back. Well, then we decided we'd get Lou's 2 black Labradors and hook them to the sleigh and put the baby in the middle, you see, in this box. Well, of course, the old dogs, the faster the sleigh went, the faster they went. And then they decided they're going to turn left up Lindsay Avenue. Well, you know what happened to the sleigh and the baby in the box. And Lou and I are just petrified. We're up, I guess, just by the edge of your place in Burden's. And of course, the baby starts howling, and my mother could hear it from her house, which was, I guess, a block and a half away. And of course, she didn't know what happened to the kid. We're dusting them off and trying to get them home, shut them up. That's one story. So,
We used to get so excited just to see a car on the Hudson Road.
oh yeah,
Here comes a car.
that's right. Another story I'll tell. Me and my immediate younger brother, we were going to Scouts, and those days you walked, and there was no street lights or hardly any. So we'd walk up to West Saanich and then down to the Scout Hall. We had our uniform on, short pants and all that stuff. And the head honcho from the South Island Scout group was coming out to the Scout Hall. Well, one of the codes of a Scout is you never hitchhike. So my brother and I, guess who picked us up? We spent the evening down here, I don't know, in a corner or something. We never hitchhiked in our uniforms after that. And then we used to go up to your dad's place, Peter, and you had all them trails and stuff through the back. Yeah, I used to have a lot of fun. And then, like, to go from that to a farm 3 miles long and half a mile wide, you know, it was nothing. Any other questions? These ladies I used to square dance with, do you still square dance? I don't.
Where did you square dance?
The old Royal Oak Community Hall, wasn't it? Yeah.
Common Central Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the municipal office was next door, and the Saanich police were in the basement. Yeah.
Victoria's a small world when you think that Bonnie and Jerry and myself and Keith
Yeah.
have reunited at Mount Golf Course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we all meet there and golf.
That's right. Every Wednesday. You guys do, isn't it? Wednesdays? Yeah, we're Monday, Wednesday, Friday, our group.
They golf 3 times.
Yeah, we used to belong to Royal Oak, so that's another story.
With Bruce Corbett and
Yeah.
who else is it, Bonnie? John Tyler. John Tyler. And my other friends that golf with us go, how did you grow up where there were only 50 children and you seem to know everybody on the golf course?
Then another hookup you and I got, Marilyn, is your friends in Trevino and our friends in Trevino. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Our old school grounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we used to cut through your place to go to Panama Flats and
Yes.
all that stuff. No one cared in those days, you know.
That was everybody did that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.